Okay, so this is a class on the when a seller remains in possession after a sale. There are two forms to choose from, and it's very important that you choose the correct form. There's the SIP, or seller in possession, or the RLAS, which is residential lease after sale. And even though it makes it very clear in the RPA which to use, a lot of agents don't use it correctly. So if a seller is taking possession or is remaining in possession past the close of escrow, even one day, this form should be used. So if you're seeing if you're representing a buyer in the MLS, it says possession is COE +3, that means the seller is asking for 3 days after the close of escrow to remain in possession. So you would use one of these forms. And which would you use? You would use the SIP, because the SIP is from day 1 to day 29. Once again, the SIP is from day 1 to day 29. And the RLAS, which is the residential lease after sale, is from day 30 through anything past 30 days. So I'm going to ask wait, hold on. Micro front desk. Unmute yourself. Who is that? Micro front desk. Micro front desk. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that.
Rich, I have a quick question regarding the SIP.
Sure.
If it's close of escrow +3, I should know this, but I don't. Does day 1 start the day after the recording?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, so let's where are you? Share screen. Let's look at these. If I can find it. Hold on. I have too many things open. There we go. All right. Okay. So what you should be seeing, and it shows me that you are seeing this, is the seller lease to remain in possession addendum, which is the SIP license. I didn't say lease. I said lease, but I didn't mean lease. Seller license to remain in possession. It's called that for a reason, because you don't want to establish a lease. So it is a license to remain in the property, and it is intended, says it right on the form, intended for possession of 29 days or less. So this is an addendum to the purchase agreement, which is default, or it could be added in a seller counter, or it could be added in a buyer counter. So wherever this document is being added, that's what it is an addendum to. So if you're adding it after the initial RPA or the initial purchase agreement, be it a seller or a buyer, you would say in the counter that whoever's presenting it, if the seller's presenting it, then buyers to sign the attached SIP, or if it's the other way around, then seller, the buyer's presenting it, then seller to sign the attached SIP. So that's pretty straightforward, whether it's an addendum to the purchase agreement, to the counters, either seller or buyer. And obviously it's dated, the property and the buyer's name and the seller's name. So the terms, the seller is granted a license to remain in possession for X number of days. And once again, that needs to be 29 days or less after close of escrow, or it's to a date, once again, 29 days or less, until it defaults to 6 p.m. But you can change that, obviously, to whatever time that anybody wants. Seller has no right to remain in possession beyond this term and may be responsible for court-awarded damages if seller does remain. Okay, so the consideration. So it's either a dollar amount, which you can put a dollar amount per day, or you can check this box and you can write no consideration, you can write none, you can write whatever. It'll allow you to write text. Oop. Why can I? Yeah, you can write text as long as you check the box, evidently. Okay, so seller shall deposit such funds with escrow prior to close of escrow, or such funds shall be withheld from seller's proceeds, and then at close of escrow, all consideration either will be released, it defaults to be released to the buyer, or if you check that box, will be held in escrow. So either the buyer gets the money up front once close of escrow happens, or it's held in escrow. So those are the two choices. If seller vacates the property prior to the end of the term, no portion of the consideration will be returned to seller unless otherwise agreed in writing. That's very important. So if the seller says, okay, I'm going to stay 7 days, I'm going to pay you $100 a day, so here's $700. And that's it. And no other agreement was made between the parties, and the seller decides, you know what, I did what I needed to do, and on day 4 I'm moving out, so I want $300 back. Well, guess what? You don't get anything back, because there's no other agreement, and the agreement is that you're going to stay for X number of days and you're going to pay X number of money. So that's really important. So if the seller wants the option for that money to be, if they don't use up all those days, there has to be another agreement, and I'll show you where to do it later. So late charges, I don't know where there would be any late charges associated with this, but they have a stipulation for late charges because everything's being paid up front. So I don't understand that. Seller's obligation for condition of property. So they're obligated to maintain the property, including a pool, spa, landscaping. They're still obligated to do so. So it's right here in the agreement. Delivery of possessions, seller shall deliver the property in the condition and on the terms provided in this agreement, meaning when they say they are. Delivery of a possession fee. So this used to be called a deposit. It's no longer called a deposit. And it's called a possession fee. So in addition to the license fee, seller agrees to deposit with escrow or such funds shall be withheld from their proceeds a delivery of possession fee in the amount of X amount of dollars. So at close of escrow, this fee will be either released to the buyer or held in escrow. Within 5 days after delivery of possession to the buyer shall return that fee. So it really is a deposit. So Duran asked the question, is this considered income? You're renting a property, so it is considered income. I don't know. Yeah, it is. So that's just the easy answer there. Utilities. Seller agrees to pay all utilities and any related utility services and the following charges. So that's if they needed to pay something, like in the HOA, if you want them to pay the HOA fee or a portion of the HOA fee, that would go there. Anything besides the utilities, they're automatically on the hook to pay utilities. Now, if the buyer is going to pay some of these utilities, then that would be the except. So entry. Seller shall make property available to the buyer for the purpose of entering to make necessary or agreed upon repairs or supply necessary or agreed upon service or to show the property to prospective or actual purchasers. Hey, he may want to sell it after he bought it. Tenants, mortgagees, lenders, basically anyone. And basically what this is saying that all I have to do is give you 24 hours notice, oral or written. If I was the buyer, I'd make sure it was written. And that's all I have to do, give you 24 hours and I will have access to the property. Now the buyer may not move personal property into the property without prior written consent from the seller. And there's a form in CAR to do so to move personal property either prior to close of escrow or if the seller is still in possession. So there is a form in CAR forms. So that's that. The buyer can have entry with 24 hours notice. Keys per the contract, even if seller is remaining in possession, keys are to be delivered at close of escrow. That's per the contract, unless other terms were agreed upon. So at close of escrow, you still should be getting keys for your buy. So this reiterates that point that the seller shall provide keys and other items necessary to access the property at close of escrow, or there's a box here to check at the end of this term. So other items included in the agreement shall be provided. Okay. Assignment. Seller, they're not allowed to, okay, I'm gonna let somebody else move in here. They're not allowed to do that. Insurance. Basically, this line says the seller, hey, we're not covering any of your possessions. And the seller is advised to carry their own insurance to protect the seller from loss and to contact its own insurance carrier to consider their options. Now, if I was the buyer, I would insist that they get some sort of, or hold some sort of insurance. And I will also show you where you would do that. Waiver. The waiver of any breach shall not be construed as a continuing waiver the same. Okay, that's legalese. Okay, so other terms are here. So this is where you would say seller is taking possession up to 7 days. Should seller vacate property prior to those 7 days, the remaining days of this license will be credited back to the seller. So that's where you would write that if you want to have that stipulation in there. Also, this is where you would write that the seller is to carry their own insurance for their personal properties after the close of escrow. So that's what this would be used for. So here, note, regardless of the length of time for possession as originally agreed, if buyer and seller intend to extend this SIP beyond 29 days, buyer and seller are advised to consult with a qualified local landlord-tenant attorney regarding whether a landlord-tenant relationship may inadvertently be created. Because guess what happens after 30 days or at 30 days? You create a landlord-tenant situation, and that's why there's 2 different forms. And it's important to use the right form. So that is the seller in possession addendum. Anybody have any questions on this? Bueller? I'm not hearing it. Okay. So moving on to the residential lease after sale. So this is intended for 30 days or more if the seller is remaining in possession for 30 days or more. And why? Because it is, you see, it says seller, tenant, buyer, housing provider. What's confusing, Dave? I don't know what's confusing. 30 days creates a tenancy. That's why it needs to be a different form. I don't know if that's what's confusing. And so it's a more in-depth agreement because it actually is a tenancy. So, and as I was saying, seller, tenant, buyer, housing provider. So the housing provider rents to the tenant and the tenant rents from the housing provider the address and lists the people who are only the people who are authorized to stay at that residence. So it should be the seller and their family, whoever that is. And guests are not permitted to stay more than 14 days. That's a long time, 2 weeks. Without housing providers' written consent. Now, a seller is going to say, "This is my house, and I should be able to have guests for as long as I want." But guess what? You sold it, and on the close of escrow, it's no longer your house. So here's the term. The term begins on a date and shall terminate on a date. So it has a beginning date and an end date. It cannot be open-ended. That does not constitute a valid lease, which this is, or a valid contract. So it has to have a beginning date and an end date. So make sure that it is acceptable and shall terminate X calendar days after close of escrow or a date. So so the start date is the close of escrow date. and the day after, the day after close of escrow date. That kind of answers your question, Jasmine. Okay. So Dave says, if it's over 30 days, do you do a lease? That's what this form is, because it's called a residential lease after sale. So this is what you have to use, RLAS, if it's 30 days or more. Okay, so this contract could be for the number of days, or it could be a specific date. So there you go. So escrow payments, everything's going through escrow. So a security deposit, a first month's rent, or rent for the entire lease term, if lease term is at least 6 months, or other. I guess you can put what other payments that you're asking them to pay per escrow instructions shall be paid out of seller's proceeds from escrow for the purchase of the premises. So you can get the security deposit and the first month's rent, or you can get the security deposit and the rent for the entire term. So if the lease term is at least 6 months. So I doubt if you will do this for more than 6 months. So most likely it's just going to be the security deposit and the first month's rent. So because a lender, if there's a lease, if there's a loan on this, a lender, I'm sure, will not approve a 6-month rent back. So just FYI. So rent shall mean monetary obligation of tenant to the housing provider, except for the security deposit. Tenant agrees to pay X amount per month. Rent is payable on whatever day each month. Commencement date falls on any day other than the day rent is payable. Is paid 1 full month's rent in advance. Rent for the second calendar month shall be prorated on a 30-day period. So basically what that's saying is that if you want rent to be due on the 1st, but it closes escrow on the 20th, then, and you've collected the first month's rent, well, the first month's rent was only 10 days. So then, things will be prorated from that point on for that month. Rent shall be delivered. Who's it going to be delivered to? Because escrow is not going to take the rent unless it's a 6 month or more. They're not going to take that money. So it has to go to the buyer. So it's just like a lease. So who it's going to, and it can be paid. Check if may be paid personally. They want to pay it personally, and it says what hours. If payment is returned for insufficient funds, and may require the person to pay it in cash. And all future payments, either money order, cashier's check. Security deposit, this talks about security deposit. Remember, you're dealing with a lease, so it's not the buyer's furniture, so you can't be having a security deposit based on a furnished unit. So the most you can collect for a security deposit at this given time is 2 months rent. I will give everybody a heads up that legislation is out there and floating around that security deposits are only going to be allowed for 1 month's rent. So, but that hasn't happened yet. So we still go by the rules of 2 months for unfurnished, 3 months for furnished. So that talks about what the security deposit is. All or any portion of the security deposit may be used as reasonably necessary to cure tenants' default in payments or to repair damage, just like any other security deposit is used for. I'm sorry, something flashed on my screen. I thought somebody was asking a question, but no. Security deposit will not be returned until the tenants have vacated properties and all keys returned. Any security deposit returned by check shall be made out to all tenants named in this agreement or as subsequently modified. No interest is paid. Security deposits held by owner. Tenant agrees not to hold broker responsible. Now this goes into late charges where there could be legitimate late charges if they don't pay, if they're more than 1 month rent, and they don't pay that second or third month rent, then you can charge a late fee. But it cannot be like a unrealistic late fee. I mean, you can't charge like $500 late fee. I mean, that makes no sense. That's, you know, you will be taken to court, I can guarantee you. Or the seller or the buyer. No, the buyer. Yes, the buyer. I'm confused. I'm confusing myself. It is, you're right, Dave. It is confusing. Okay, so parking. We talk about parking. Where's parking permitted? Storage. Where's storage? Utility. Just like in the seller in possession, what utilities they're responsible for. And it talks about water sub-meters and electric meters and all of that. Condition of premises is, you know, and tenant acknowledges that, you know, I mean, it's their house and they're just, you know, renting it beyond the 30 days or the 30 days and more. So this is all pretty standard. Maintenance and use. So now if the buyer, now the housing provider, wants to get their own gardener in there and start doing things the way they want to do it, they may be providing the gardening and all this stuff. But that is just kind of, this is part of the negotiation of, you know, how this is going to go. Who's going to maintain, who's going to do the gardening, who's going to maintain, you know, the gardening and the shrubs and all that, and who's going to maintain what. That's just how it is. Neighborhood condition, you know, it's silly that this is in there because it's the same neighborhood they've lived in all their life. I mean, for how long they've owned this. So if they have a pet, remember the pet addendum has been changed. It's the animal terms and conditions addendum. It's no longer called the pet addendum. So you would fill that out. Smoking, even if they've had smoked, here's the thing, even if it's their house and they've smoked in it for 30 years, it's now the buyer's house. And if they say you can't smoke in that house, you can't smoke in that house. So so that will go over very well, I'm sure. Talks about rules and regulations, especially if it's a condominium. Repairs, tell you know, the tenants not to make any repairs on their own. What they, you know, what keys they have, mailbox, common areas, all of this, and they all acknowledge that this, you know, they have these. Talks about entry once again. Photographs and internet advertising is in order to effectively, you know, this may be a rental for the buyer. So they may suddenly put, you know, pictures on the internet, and you know, the tenant really has to abide, you know, allow that, and a for sale sign or a for lease sign, you know. Once again, no subletting. Tenant's obligation upon vacating the premises. Upon termination of the agreement, tenant shall give the homeowners all copies of of the keys, remove all personal property, clean and deliver the premises, uh, and all alterations or improvements, with or without the housing provider's consent, become the property of the homeowner, the housing provider. Meaning, if you, while you're renting this in possession, you decide to build some shelves and all this stuff and do all this stuff, I don't know why you would do it, but if you do, it now becomes part of the house and you can't take it with you. Right to pre-move out inspection and repairs. After giving or receiving notice of termination of tenancy, or before the expiration of this agreement, tenant has the right to request that an inspection of the premises take place prior to the termination. If tenant requests such an inspection, tenant shall be given an opportunity to remedy identified deficiencies. Not many people do this. I think it's a good idea, saying, hey, look over this because I want my deposit back. Early termination, they're, just like any lease, they're responsible for the whole term of the lease. They get out, if they decide to move out early, they still owe that money. So, they could be taken to court. Damage to the property, obviously they're responsible for damage, and it could be deducted from the security deposit. Tenant is advised to carry on renter's insurance to protect the tenant from any loss. And this is the first time, I think they changed this in December, that they added a checkbox that they shall obtain. Well, that's liability insurance, so that's not renter's insurance. They can ask for you to obtain liability insurance, like additionally cover, and I name the buyer as additionally covered. Water beds, obviously, water beds. Nobody likes a water bed anymore. Never did. Waiver notices, because the address, the tenant has to agree to, if they're asked to do an estoppel. An estoppel is if the buyer was turning around and selling this, they have to do an estoppel saying, this is what I pay a month, this is what my security deposit is, these are the terms of this agreement. So everybody has to agree to mediation, and whoever wins gets the attorney's fees. And the statutory disclosure, because this is a lease, you have to make those mold disclosures. If it's before 78, lead-based paint, bed bugs, all of this. And then agency fill outs, who's representing who. This is important. Termination of agency relationship. Housing provider and tenant acknowledge and agrees that unless broker is the property manager, and none of us are property managers, where did this go? Or as specified in 2 below, once this agreement commences, meaning once this agreement starts upon close of escrow, the broker will not represent owner in any manner regarding the management of the premises. Any representation, duties that broker may owe to, or any agency relationship that broker may have with either housing provider or tenant is terminated. I say this all the time, even with leases. Once that property is leased, you're done. You have no more involvement. It's now a tenant landlord issue, and they need to deal with themselves. They need to deal themselves with any issues that commence from that point forward. So and you could change that to broker duty and responsibility to either housing provider or tenant will terminate upon the completion of a move-in inspection. You can change that to move-in inspection as opposed to at close of escrow. So that's really important. Somebody had a question that if the tenant does not vacate after the term, does not pay, does buyer file a 3-day notice? Yes, it's this is a lease. So it's like any other lease that now you have to start these proceedings, and you may have to try to evict in order to get them out because now they are a tenant. So yes. We're not managing the property. Nobody's managing the property. And if the tenant is an entity or the seller is an entity, so if it was in a trust, then this is in a trust and they're an entity. So same with the buyer. If they were a trust, an LLC, then they were an entity. Make sure that you're filling these things out, that they are entities, because an entity cannot sign a contract. Only a person authorized by the entity can sign these things. So the rest are the normal disclosures. Any questions regarding the residential lease after sale? Okay, I'm not seeing any. All right. Well, that's what I was covering today. This class was suggested by somebody, so I take suggestions. If you want to learn, if you have suggestions, send me suggestions. I may use it as an upcoming class. I teach twice a month. Then the next one, let me get my calendar out. It will be no, wait, what's today? Today is the 12th. So the next one is the 26th, Wednesday, the 26th, 4 p.m. So so that's it for today. Let me stop my recording.